Hello, church family. Welcome to today's Sunday school lesson. We are in session 10, Humility Required, and our key idea this week is believers must be careful to honor God in all things, and we are in Daniel chapter 4, verses 28 through 37. We're going to start off by asking ourselves, what images come to mind when we hear the word pride? I think that a lot of us probably think pride in our country, pride in a football team, pride in our families and what we do, pride in our church or our town. We get excited about the things that are close to us, that mean a lot to us, and those can be a source of pride to us, and we will maybe rely too hard on things that we can't control, or things that we think we can control when we cannot control the outcome. So what makes being called prideful hard to swallow? When someone calls us prideful, what they mean is that we are too focused on how we look and how we're coming across, and we think that we are all that in a bag of chips, or the best thing since sliced bread. And being called prideful can often hurt because it means that we are getting in the way of what God can do for our lives. We're getting in the way of what can actually take place because we're trying to control the outcome. And we'll look today at Nebuchadnezzar and see how God took his pridefulness and humbled him, and ultimately brought Nebuchadnezzar to understand that God is in control, and he glorified God, saying that God is the God of the universe, the one true God. So we're going to read, and before we read, I just want to preface this with some more context. So last week we looked at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the fiery furnace, and Nebuchadnezzar said, "Your God has saved you." He acknowledges that the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego saved them, but that did not change his actions or the way he lived his life. He still was worshiping himself with golden idols and having music played. He just now was acknowledging that there are other gods, but not that God is the sovereign Lord of the universe. And so in today's lesson, we will see how God brings that about. So let's go ahead and get started here, and we will read chapter 4, verses 28 through 37. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking around on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, and the king exclaimed, "Is this not Babylon the Great, that I have built to be a royal residence by my vast power and for my majestic glory?" While the words were still in his mouth, a voice came from heaven, "King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared that the kingdom has departed from you. You will be driven away from people to live with the wild animals, and you will feed on grass like cattle for 7 periods of time, until you acknowledge that the Most High is ruler over human kingdoms, and that he gives them to anyone he wants." At that moment, the message against Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from the people, he ate grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with dew from the sky until his hair grew like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. But at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven, and my sanity returned to me. So we have a switch here where Nebuchadnezzar was being narrated, and now he is the narrator in verse 34. I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven, and my sanity returned to me. Then I praised the Most High, and honored and glorified him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does what he wants with the army of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can block his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At that time my sanity returned to me, and my majesty and splendor returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and my nobles sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and even more greatness came to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of the heavens, because all his works are true and his ways are just. He is able to humble those who walk in pride. So we see here in this first section, which is called Pride Declared, that when it says all this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar, it's referring to the dream that he had. This dream that he had that he would walk the land like a beast, that he would basically turn into a beast, go crazy, lose his mind, and be humbled through that. Let's read what happens in these first three verses here. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar at the end of 12 months. As he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he exclaimed, "Is this not Babylon the Great that I have built to be a royal residence by my vast power and for my majestic glory?" So here, no one called Nebuchadnezzar out on his pride except for him. He said, "Look what all the things that I have done. Look at the things I've done for my glory, for my vast, or by my vast power." So he declared his own pride. God didn't have to say, "Hey, Nebuchadnezzar, you're being prideful." He said, "You declared that you're prideful. To you it is declared that the kingdom of heaven has departed from you, and now you are going to be driven away." That is what the Lord said. He never said, "You're prideful, so this is going to happen." Nebuchadnezzar declared it on his own. So how can a person avoid the trappings of his or her own success? And does a person have to be successful to fall into the trappings of pride? We have to realize, brothers and sisters, that our success does not come from ourselves. God has given us the tools, God has given us the opportunity, and God has given us the blessing of allowing things to go our way, and that is what sets us up for success. Any success that I have, that Grace has, that you or Brother Richard or anyone else has, is solely due to the blessing of the Lord. And for someone to say, "No, I did this on my own," is denying the praise that the Lord should have and deserves for giving that thing to us. And so we can avoid trappings like this by realizing that everything we own, from the guitars that are on my walls up here, from the house that I live in, to the car that I drive, even to my family, they all belong to the Lord. They're not mine. I can't hold on to them and take them with me. No, they were created by God, given to me by God. They are God's. I just get to borrow them for a little bit. So by reminding ourselves of that we didn't do this on our own, we can avoid falling into this trap of pridefulness and allowing our own success to blind us to what God has done for us. And we don't have to be successful to fall into the trappings of pride, because pride is what causes us to sin, because it causes us to look and go, "Well, at least I'm not as bad as so-and-so. At least I'm not as bad as this person." And that's pride too. And by falling into that temptation to compare ourselves to our neighbors, we don't have to be successful. We can still fail and just go, "Well, I didn't fail that badly." And that's pride just the same. And pride, as I was taught when I was a child, pride is the root of all sin, because it tells you that you can do things on your own. You don't need God. And that is what causes us to sin and fall deeper and deeper into sin, because it is selfishness at its worst. So let's continue reading. We're going to read Reality Defined. This is where God announces what is going to happen to Nebuchadnezzar because of his pridefulness. While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven, "King Nebuchadnezzar, it is to you it is declared that the kingdom has departed from you. You will be driven away from people to live with the wild animals, and you will feed on grass like cattle for 7 periods of time, until you acknowledge that the Most High is ruler over human kingdoms, and he gives them to anyone he wants." At that moment, the message to Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from the people. He ate grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with dew from the sky until his hair grew like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. So we see here that God spoke, said something was going to happen, that he was going to be driven from the people and eat grass like animals. And then that thing happened. It didn't happen 2 days later. It happened as soon as the message was delivered, the text tells us. So the next question we have is a little strange, and it's, how is God's grace seen in the disciplining of Nebuchadnezzar? Well, if you look at 28 through 30, Nebuchadnezzar was claiming that he was the power behind it all. That is blasphemy, brothers and sisters. That is blasphemy. That is, and I don't know if there's a more clearer picture of blasphemy, saying that I did this all on my own. I am essentially God. And God has killed and taken the lives of people in the Old Testament and in the New Testament for doing similar things. And here, that's not what happened. Nebuchadnezzar was not punished by death, by an immediate and swift death, and one that would have been deserved by the justness of the Lord. If the Lord had decided to take Nebuchadnezzar then, he would have been just in doing so, because he had done it before and he does it later as well. And because it is something that God takes very personally when we take praise due to him and direct it to ourselves. So God's grace is seen here because he doesn't kill Nebuchadnezzar outright. He humbles him. He says, you're going to suffer, but through this suffering, you're going to know that I am God and that I am in charge, and I've given you this kingdom of Babylon. Even though you don't believe me, even though you didn't believe me until you threw some of my servants in a fire, I gave this to you, and you don't deserve it on your own. You did nothing to do it on your own. You don't deserve it, period, because you've been attacking Israel, and I gave Israel over to you. So to the extent that the king had any idea of what was happening to him, the experience, he must have been terrified by this experience. God took him from the splendor of Babylon's palace to a humble place among the animals. God earlier had exalted Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, he gave him the kingdom of Babylon, built him up, allowed him to conquer Israel. Now God has humbled him. So what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, or how does what happened to Nebuchadnezzar remind us of our plight apart from God and his grace? Brothers and sisters, we deserve death. Just like Nebuchadnezzar deserved death, God was gracious, God was merciful, and did not kill him outright. God exhibits that same grace to us when he doesn't kill us outright for our pridefulness, for our sin, and ultimately his grace was shown through sending Christ to die for us. We can't accomplish anything on our own. We cannot achieve heaven on our own. And in comparison to God and being apart from his grace, there's no hope that we have. But we do have a hope because of Jesus. And Nebuchadnezzar had no hope other than God's mercy in not killing him right away, and mercy in the fact that it only was 7 years that he spent like this, 7 periods of time. And so Nebuchadnezzar didn't die. He got his kingdom taken away from him, but then it was given back. And it was given back because honor was given. This is our last section here, verses 34 through 37. But at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven, and my sanity returned to me. Then I praised the Most High and glorified and honored him who lives forever, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does what he wants with the army of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can block his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At that time my sanity returned to me, and my majesty and splendor returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and my nobles sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and even more greatness came to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of heavens, because all his works are true and his ways are just. He is able to humble those who walk in pride. So why does it sometimes take a humbling experience for a person to recognize God and offer him the praise and honor that he is due? Well, sometimes we need a wake-up call, brothers and sisters. How often have we been in an argument and we have known that we were wrong, and we've known that we were going down the wrong path of the argument with a loved one, And something had to happen. They had to say something, or even maybe slap us across the cheek, that kind of wakes us up to the foolishness that we have and humbles us, knowing that we've acted so foolishly. That's what it was here. This was a wake-up call for Nebuchadnezzar. It was a harsh wake-up call, but it was better than the alternative of death. Remember, he was blaspheming the Lord. So the reason it took this and takes a humbling experience is because Nebuchadnezzar thought he was ruler of his own life, and this is what made him realize, oh, I'm actually not in control here. God is in control here. So with that in mind, how does honoring and praising God help keep a proper perspective in life? Well, it always reminds us that God is God. He is in charge. He is in control, and we are not. And that should be a comforting thought to us, because if we are not in control, if we don't have control over how we're treated or what happens tomorrow, that means we don't have to worry about it. Because if God is in control, then we can trust that he's going to take care of us. That doesn't mean that we'll never go through trials. That doesn't mean we'll never go through hard times. But that does mean that God will never leave us. And as long as we keep God at the forefront of our minds as the priority in our lives, then he's going to be faithful to us the same way that we're faithful to him, and bless us with his protection through those trials. And so in times of when there's not trials, we get blessings. When there are trials, we get blessings that look differently. We get blessings through lessons and protection, not things that are material that we can hold in our hand. So I hope this has been encouraging to you, and I hope this has been this spurs you to examine your own life for pride and the ways that you are living like Nebuchadnezzar, that you're exalting yourself above the Lord. And I pray that you will repent of that you will think about the ways that you can honor God for the things that you have. So thank you. I look forward to worshiping with you very soon. Bye-bye.